The Bedford County Courthouse was built in 1828 at a time when neoclassical architecture was the standard for government buildings throughout the United States. Chances are good if you have a courthouse in your county built between 1790 and 1850, it's a neoclassical design. To fully understand neoclassical architecture, it helps to know a little bit about the United States Constitution.
Our Constitution is the supreme law of the United States. Revolutionary? Yes. But it wasn't created in a vacuum. The ideals from two ancient civilizations were key influences on the development of our Constitution. The democracy of Greece and the Republic of Rome had a profound effect on the establishment of our government. And that is why elements from these two civilizations are so prominent on many of our government buildings. Let's start with the Greeks. Here's a picture of the Greek Parthenon as it exists today atop the Acropolis, a hill overlooking Athens, Greece. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but this original is about 2,500 years old. There is actually a replica of the Parthenon right here in the U.S. Here it is. A replica of the Greek Parthenon was built in Nashville, Tennessee, about 100 years ago. Notice the prominent triangle at the top, that's a pediment. And notice those prominent columns. The columns hold up the pediment and form the covered entrance called a portico. Greek. The Greeks built using squares, rectangles, and triangles, except of course for those columns. Roman architecture was influenced by the early Greeks, but the Romans created their own distinctive look by adding curves and circles to the mix, creating features like arches, domes, and round walls. Neoclassical designs are a blend of Greek and Roman elements. Buildings like the U.S. Capitol, the White House in Washington, D.C. with its famous Oval Office, the Supreme Court building, state capitals and county courthouses across America.
And this brings us to our own little slice of Greek and Roman influence on a small town scale, the Bedford County Courthouse. Notice the pediment, the obvious columns. Inside the pediment, you'll see that arched window. That's a fan light hearkening back to the Roman arch. And atop the Bedford County Courthouse is a gold-painted dome. Bedford County's courthouse was built by a man named Solomon Filler at a total cost of $7,500. Filler also built a number of other buildings around town that you can see, including the Presbyterian Church across the street. He also built the Bedford Springs Hotel. And now for a bonus feature about columns.
From our studios atop Acropolis Hill in Artemis, Pennsylvania, it's Column Time! Everything you always wanted to know about columns, but were afraid to ask, here's your host, Nick Alexander!
Welcome, thrill seekers, to another episode of Column Talk. We begin this episode with a cautionary tale for young men pitching woo. This is Jack and Mandy on their first date. Everything is going fine until suddenly the conversation turns to columns. Let's roll the tape.
Where's the food?
It's taking forever. Thank you for showing me your wonderful town, Jack. What kind of columns are those in front of the courthouse? They're Doric, right?
Round?
Oh, what a tragic web we weave when column styles we don't perceive. But then, Jack discovered episode 1 of Column Talk. Let's take a look.
There are two major factors that should be considered when identifying Greek columns. First, the ratio, that is the height compared to the width. Thicker columns have a rise of 6:1. These are masculine order. The more slender feminine order has a rise of 8:1, and these are feminine columns. The second identifying feature is the top of the column. This is called a caput or caput. It means head. For example, a Jerry Garcia disciple in the days of ancient Rome would have been called a caput mortuum. There are three classic orders of Greek columns. The earliest is the masculine Doric order. A Doric order column has a ratio of 6:1, 6 feet in height for every 1 foot in diameter. The rise is thick and stocky, like a man. As for the top, or caput, it is simple and plain, like most men. The second is a feminine column, an Ionic order column. This column has a more slender rise, and at the top, a slightly decorative caput. The scrolls or ringlets on each side of an Ionic order column are called volutes. You'll also find a volute atop a violin, or for those of you raised on barn dances, a fiddle. The third column style is also feminine, a Corinthian order column. It features the same slender rise of an Ionic column, but has a much more complicated or ornate top, decorated with leaves, volutes, and other decorative carvings. These are the three classic Greek order columns: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian.
You know, I prefer the more feminine line and volute top of the Ionic column. The Corinthian caput is just too baroque.
I feel that way too. Oh, Jack.
Oh, Kara. Thanks, Column Talk.
Congratulations, Jack. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to join us next time on Column Talk.
You'll see the influence of Greece and Rome on buildings throughout the United States. A classic example on a small town scale is the Bedford County Courthouse.
In 1933, the Gulf Oil Company built this gas station, Dunkel's Gulf. Dick Dunkel's name is still over the door. Now this gas station is Art Deco, but then again, so is this, and this, and this. You see the similarities? I don't either. But they are all Art Deco. If you want to understand Art Deco, you need to understand this. Art Deco is not a particular style. Neoclassical, that's a style. Federalist, that's a style. Gothic Revival, that's a style. But Art Deco is a term that we use to categorize the varied styles of the 1920s and 30s. Art Deco is an era. What we now call Art Deco started appearing in the 1920s on things like radios, jewelry, jukeboxes, clocks, and even diners. They didn't call it Art Deco, they just called it modern, influenced by their own modern times. And the three major influences on those modern times, the 1920s and 30s, were the opening of King Tut's tomb, modern art trends like Picasso's Cubism, and the rise of the automobile. By the 1920s, the car had replaced the horse as the preferred transportation method. America was being transported. Dirt streets, hitching posts were replaced with paved roads and gas stations. Horses, you could still find them. But the automobile, that was the future. A big city example of the automobile influence on architecture is this, the Chrysler Building in New York City. Adorned with hood ornament gargoyles and hubcaps. The use of metal and chrome in the iconic Art Deco diner was also influenced by the automobile. Automobile influences included rounded corners, aerodynamic streamlined form, and the use of metal or chrome. A second influence on the culture in the 1920s and 30s was a modern art style created by this man, Pablo Picasso. Picasso began reducing images to geometric equivalents. Clean lines now defined the art. Colors were often removed from reality, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes muted. The style was called Cubism. Modern art influences on Art Deco architecture included the use of clean lines, geometric shapes, and exaggerated or muted colors. The third major influence on the era was King Tutankhamun. King Tut was an Egyptian pharaoh from about 1300 BC. In 1922, an archaeologist unearthed something the world had never seen before, the relatively intact tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh, King Tut. Newspapers made the discovery famous, and by 1925, Egyptian styling was becoming popular on jewelry, furniture, interior design, and architecture. Influences on Art Deco architecture include the use of sunbursts, a horizontal emphasis, ziggurats or pyramid-like roofs, and the prevalent use of threes. And that brings us to Gulf Oil. In 1932, the Gulf Oil Company built their new headquarters in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here's the building as it stands today. Notice the ziggurat or pyramid-like effect on the roof. Well, that same year, they set out to build a showpiece gas station along the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway was the country's first coast-to-coast road. It stretches across America from New York City to San Francisco. And in the 1930s, it was bustling with travelers who set out to see America from the comfort of their cars. So Gulf Oil hired this man, Pittsburgh architect Edward Weber, to do a design for their showpiece station. Now, Weber wasn't normally a gas station designer. Most of his commissions were for public buildings like schools, churches like this one. This is the inside of St. Joseph's Cathedral in Wheeling, West Virginia. When Gulf Oil commissioned Edward Weber, is it really a surprise that his gas station was fashioned after a church? An Egyptian church. Here's a picture of an ancient Egyptian temple. Notice the pattern of three: tall, short, tall. Weber took this look, modified it a bit, and voila! Dunkel's Gulf! His design was short, tall, short, with a flat roof, tapered at the top. Weber even included some Americanized hieroglyphs in the horizontal banding along the top. So to sum it up, Art Deco is simply a term that we apply today to categorize the modern architecture of the 1920s and 30s. The term actually came from a 1925 World Fair held in Paris, France. The exhibition of modern, decorative, and industrial art was held to highlight the relationship between art and industrial design. In the 1960s, this exhibition name was the origin for the term you now know as Art Deco. There are still some old Art Deco gas stations in the United States today, but to our knowledge, this Egyptian temple design is the only one still standing. It's still a gas station, and it's still full service.
So we're now going to be looking at modern and postmodern architecture. And the modern architecture really begins round about the middle 1800s leading into the 1860s. So we have architects starting to use the products of the Industrial Revolution. The Eiffel Tower in Paris is actually also called the Iron Lady. She's made mainly of iron, and she was built for a World's Fair and was meant to be a temporary structure. But with the popularity of radio broadcasting and the suitability of using the Eiffel Tower as a radio tower, along with the fact that, let's be honest, the Parisians had actually somehow fallen in love with the Iron Lady, it was decided to keep her and not take her down. And when she was initially built, people thought she was terribly ugly. She grew on people. People started to realize that just as a Gothic cathedral becomes the emblem of a town and the thing that you can see from the distance, so the Eiffel Tower became this focal point to Paris, something that visitors could see from afar, and also an example of France's coming into the modern era. So we talked about iron. Another innovation of the time was the skyscraper. And this is actually the first skyscraper ever built. So at its time, it was the tallest building, and it was built in Chicago. Chicago was a bustling city, had a lot of workers, a lot of money was flowing, people were purchasing and buying, and the city was becoming very congested, and there was a need to start to build up because they were running out of space to build out. Sullivan, the architect, took a extremely modern look at the dilemma and decided that he was going to take the challenge on and created this very lovely skyscraper. And I know to us now, this is not a skyscraper, it's just, a few stories tall. But at the time, it was extremely exciting and innovative. So what Sullivan had to do is create a skeleton of metal to hold the building up. And then he was able to put a lot of glass. This design of metal skeleton, which is very similar to the idea of what we saw with the Eiffel Tower, and then the glass encasing, very much has been the theme of modern building. Now, there was a style of art that really pushed modern architecture forward, and it was called the Bauhaus movement. And it became popular throughout the world, although it did begin in Germany. And with Bauhaus, the idea is that form should follow function. So basically what that means is figure out what the function is, what do you use the building for, and then create a practical form that allows for that function to be easily and efficiently carried out. So this factory here, you could see that decoration has been stripped away. We've pretty much started getting these boxed shaped buildings because in many ways a box is easy to build, and because again of the metal structure of the building, there is the ability to have lots of windows to let in light. Now we're still playing with the idea of the box, But Frank Lloyd Wright was an architect that started to really play around with maneuvering these box shapes and creating interesting contraptions and interesting sculptural forms. The Kaufman House is a fascinating example of the cantilever design. I don't know if any of you have ever bought one of those IKEA chairs that look like if you sit on it, you're going to, break it because it's only supported on one end. But that's an example of cantilever. So what Lloyd Wright did is the building is supported in the central column. Rooms are cantilevered off to the point where they literally hang right over the waterfall. And the builders who built this actually discarded Frank Lloyd Wright's original plans and nearly tripled the amount of foundation and construction because they didn't believe that the structure was going to stand up. Consequently, the structure became too heavy, and there has been some sagging and damage due to this mistaken compensation that the builders took against Frank Lloyd Wright's protestations. Another thing that's extremely important in modern art is steel. Both iron and steel were produced in abundance after the Industrial Revolution. And steel, with its immense strength, allowed for people to build things it became popular throughout the world about postmodern. Now, with all styles, you've got to keep in mind that there's never an exact moment where you can say, aha, on the 6th of January, 1963, postmodernism began. As with anything, there is a slow metamorphosis of style over time. And so architects would sometimes incorporate maybe a few postmodern elements, but still build a building that was quite modern in its essence. So I'm going to point out what postmodern design is about. And my hope is that you understand how different it is from the boxy modern architecture that Bauhaus made so popular. So this is a Pompidou Theatre in Paris. And what's really innovative about this is that all the inside plumbing and pipes and walkways have been put on the outside. So instead of hiding all these ugly pipes, which we usually do inside our walls here in Canada, the designers put it all on the outside. It's like taking a building and literally turning it inside out so that all the hidden things become seen. And originally, the pipes and walkways were color-coded. So, for example, water pipes were painted blue, and there were red pipes and yellow pipes, etc. But over time, as new coats of paint have to be applied, someone has decided that they're going to tone down the colors, and they're sticking fairly consistently with a white, silver, and red design. But at any time it could change. Someone might get very inspired one day and paint this whole thing bright pink. Who knows? Now, going back to the idea of being able to have that strong core, that skeleton, this is actually the OCADU building in Toronto. OCADU is the Ontario College of Arts and Design, and it's actually now also a university. And what you'll notice is that due to this very strong inner skeleton, the architects were able to give this building a skin of white and black checkers with windows that really does not support the building in any way. It's purely for decoration and to protect the inside of the building. What you'll probably also notice are these interesting diagonals that have been associated with pencil crayons or wax crayons, which is appropriate since it's an art college. So in the modern times, when they strip away decoration, color is simple. If you don't need it, don't put it in. Well, with postmodernism, architects are starting to have a little bit more fun. And they're starting to realize, you know what, we don't want to have a city full of boring grey and brown boxes. We want to play a little bit. Even though OKG still has its box shape, there's still a lot about it that's very postmodern. And the second thing that's postmodern is the fact that it juts into space. While modern buildings often sit low on the ground, or high on the ground if case of skyscrapers, while modern buildings are usually firmly and solidly supported on the ground, obviously not necessarily when we're talking about bridges, but most of the buildings are solidly based on the ground. With postmodernism, architects start to play with the idea of weightlessness, which is similar to what the Gothic architects were playing with in their cathedrals. Because architects had access to all these innovative materials that are constantly being manufactured, they were able to create this sense of the building being lifted weightlessly up above the air. And if you're wondering how to get into this building, the brown brick structure underneath is actually the main entrance with some offices and classrooms. And then you go up an elevator to get to the top part. This is one of my absolute favorite buildings. I can't get over how beautiful it is. It is a work by the architect Frank Gehry, who actually designed the AGO, Art Gallery of Ontario, which is downtown Toronto. With this building, he's played with titanium. He's created these absolutely wonderful sculptural curves and flowing lines. Using his strong metal structure, he was able to add a coat of titanium plates that give this building a beautiful sense of value. So you can see how the highlights bounce off the metal, and then there's areas of shadow. It's truly a lovely design. And with postmodernism, the word sculptural also comes into mind, because the works often in themselves look like art. So the idea of form follows function, which is so important in Bauhaus design, is almost completely eradicated. And now architects are saying, you know what? Buildings do need to look good. We want to look at architecture in our cities, and we want to feel uplifted. We want to feel that we're looking at something that is pleasing and visually exciting. This is the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and what has happened that's very postmodern is the fact that the architects have accepted the historical styles. So when you look at the left-hand side, you'll see a Victorian Romanesque revival building, and we know that it's Romanesque because it doesn't have Gothic arches, it has rounded arches, hence the Roman in Romanesque. But to the left, we have the crystal, which is this extremely sculptural structure that is jutting out into space in good old postmodernism style. The artist has tried to incorporate both the old and the new. With modern artists, they were really trying to reject the old, reject ornament, reject architecture that was sometimes obnoxiously over-decorated and over-elaborate, and go towards that very simple, basic, minimalistic box shape. Our postmodern architects are coming back around and saying, you know what, we want to have fun. We're going to put pattern and design and texture, and we're going to play with glass and new materials. But we also appreciate the design and the texture of our predecessors. And so there's been this wonderful blending of two styles in one edifice. I'm going to finish off with the Burj Khalifa, and I do apologize if I pronounce it wrong. But what's really exciting about this building is that it's currently the tallest standing tower in the whole world. This building is in Dubai, but this building really makes me think of Gothic architecture. It is almost as if it is a cathedral. The spire that juts into the sky is a beacon to visitors of the city, saying, here we are, we have wealth, we have innovation and know-how, and see what we can do, which is exactly what the Gothic architects were trying to do. Of course, in the Gothic era, they were trying to really also throw religion in. This is very much a secular building. It is not about religion. Another thing about postmodernism is they have no problem. In fact, they maybe perhaps even disdain symmetry. So the idea is to try and avoid symmetry, because although symmetry is very beautiful and stable and predictable, it's not exciting. Visually, it's kind of bland. the architects, when they designed this, ensured that the different levels of this spire, this building, which is actually a hotel with restaurants as well as apartments, they staggered the heights so that as you go up, your eye is sort of bouncing up these steps all the way to the top. And you can see from the tall skyscrapers next to it how absolutely magnificent this building really is. So a journal entry that you're going to complete for our second journal, which is due in week 11, I want you to find a building, but not one that we looked at in class, that was built in the last 40 years and that is postmodern. So you might want to look back at this video and review some of the aspects of a building that must be present to make it postmodern. Your building might not have all of these aspects, but it should at least have one or two. You're going to provide a picture and 3 reasons why you consider this work postmodern. Think about materials, the elements and principles such as balance, use of lines and shapes. Remember, modern architecture was very box-like, very linear, while postmodern, there's more use of the curved line, things like that. And you're going to enter that as your journal entry.